This meeting is being recorded.
Ready? Om Parthaya Pradibodhidam Bhagavata Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gradidam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaidam Radhavashinim Bhagavadim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambatva Manusantadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim Yam Brahma Varunendra Rudramarudastunnanti Divyaistavaihi Vedai Sankapadakramopaniषदे Gayantiyam Samagaha Dhyanavasthita Tatgatena Manasa Pasyantiyam Yogino Yasyandam Navidusura Suragana Devaya Tasmai Namaha. Good evening and welcome. So this is the continuation of the 9th chapter. I already mentioned at the very beginning that this 9th chapter is a very profound part of the entire scripture. Very philosophical and very poetic, very graphic in its description of the absolute reality. It is one of the most sublime poetical forms that you find in Sanskrit literature. The 4th verse, Maya tadamidam sarvam jagadavyakthamurtina matsthani sarvabhudani nachaham teshu avastitah. To the 4th verse. Apparently you find some contradictions between this one and the following verse. The contradiction itself is a proof of its inherent profoundness, a profound depth of the thought system. I mean, the infinite pervades the finite. The entire creation is pervaded by me. So that is the expression. Maya idam tatam. This entity, this creation is pervaded by me. Me, I, here the Atman, the infinite. The infinite pervades the finite. But at the same time, the finite is not a creation or a product of the infinite. I shall try to explain this. Let's say, in fact, that's a fundamental difference between non-dualism and dualism. You can say a clay pot is pervaded by the clay. Now, in Ramanuja philosophy or Madhva philosophy, in the dualistic systems, they would say the clay pot is a product of clay. Advaita Vedanta tells you that the clay pot is nothing but clay plus a particular form that you give to the clay and also a name that comes after that. In other words, when there is a pot sitting in front of you, it's made of clay, even then it is clay only. When you break it, it's clay. And before you made it, you manufactured a clay pot, it was clay. So when was the clay pot there? There was no clay pot at all. The clay pot is only an entity. So it's technically it's called it means it's a transfiguration or apparent creation, so to speak. Vivarta is the name used in the Vedantic tradition. Vivarta means not real transformation. Has the gold undergone a transformation when you turned gold into a golden ornament? No, really. It got associated with a form of a bracelet or ring, and then you gave it a name to distinguish it. from the gold as it was before it became an ornament. You have to distinguish, let's say, 1,000 different types of utensils made of clay. They are all sitting in front of you. Of course, you cannot use clay for drinking water. For that, you need a clay pot. So in Sanskrit, it's called Vyavaharika Buddhi, means practical utility. So practical utility doesn't make any fundamental difference between the clay pot and the clay. So before it became an ornament, it was gold. When it is in the form of an ornament, it is gold. And when it melted back, it goes back to gold. So there was no ornament at all. There was no clay pot at all. Like that, the world itself is essentially, fundamentally, ultimately, in the absolute sense, unreal, but real in the relative sense. Just like the clay pot is there, you have to drink water. A jar made of clay, you need to store water. You cannot store water in clay. For that, it needs to go through a kind of processing. Now, those who do not accept Advaita Vedanta will tell you the practical utility itself makes it a fundamentally different entity, which is from the standpoint of either epistemology or pure logic, it is absolutely untenable. So that's why the word you can see in the Sanskrit text. So it depends upon. I know I'm going to be slightly boring and a bit pedantic, but I can't help it. On the one hand, I can put it in a very, very simple, outrageously simple, simplistic way, which is an insult and actually a betrayal of the text, and of course, it's an act of disloyalty to the great scripture, which I won't do. So that's in fact, it's better to spend some time listening and discussing Aristotle, Socrates, Plato, Augustine, than listening to the terrible things going around. So at least the intellectual pastime itself has its own spiritual value, because it takes our mind away from what happens right in front of us. That's all. Now, the word Idam is interpreted by a very great Indian philosopher. His name is Vidyaranya, who is well known for writing one of the most profound biographical works on Shankaracharya's life. I mean, Srimad Shankara Digvichayam. And he lived around 14th century AD, and he has written a well-known book, Panchadashi. Panchadashi means a text, a book with 15 chapters. So there he defines Idam, that is used in the 4th verse. Ekadasendriye yuktya shastrena api avagamyate yavat kinjit bhavet idam shabdodidam jagat. What is Idam? Now you can see here the 4th chapter. Maya tadamidam sarvam. Sarvam idam maya tadam. The entire visible, empirical, phenomenal creation, existence, that you can understand, analyze and comprehend using your 5 senses of perception, 5 senses of action and mind. That's Ekadasendriya means 11 senses. 5 senses of perception, 5 senses of action, and these senses cannot really function without the help of a mind. So mind is also included, put within the category of these 11 senses. So Ekadasendriyehi yuktya shastrena api yavat kinjit avagamyate. So whatever of this world is perceived, comprehended and understood by the senses of action and senses of perception and senses of action, total 10, and mind, and of course using reasoning, perception, direct perception, inference, comparison. Of course, there are altogether 10 pramanas in the altogether Hindu tradition, but in Vedanta proper there are six pramanas. Pramanas means tools that you use to understand and pursue something. It's called epistemology in the philosophy proper. Now, whatever of this world, whatever whatever things that exist in empirical creation, that you pursue by using your senses and mind and reasoning power, and also from books, from scriptures, it is referred to as this, Idam. So, what is, if all this world is perceived by me, pervaded by me, pervaded. I am the infinite and this empirical world is the finite. Here me, we should understand from the Advaitic perspective, me is one infinite divine principle. It is not a created God who creates his world. In fact, that idea is found in the Ramanuja system, Vallabha, Nimbarka, Chaitanya, all the non-Advaitic systems of Indian philosophy. But Advaita system takes the word I here means pervaded by me as the infinite divine reality, which expresses, of course, itself as let's say a creator God and anthropomorphic God with attributes and names and forms and qualities and properties. But in the absolute analysis, it is one attributeless, all-pervading divine principle. More or less, the ultimate, highest idea of God that you find in Meister Eckhart's. That's the only comparison I can make to the students, to those who are familiar with the Christian mystical literature, or even in that sense in those who are familiar with the Western philosophical tradition. Eckhart is the only thinker and philosopher in the Western world who approaches this idea of one divine reality that is all-pervading, infinite, transcendental, cannot be named, which cannot be defined or described. So, this is the essence of this particular verse. And this idea, of course, it is a oft-repeated idea in the Upanishads that we are going to discuss today. And so, what it means is, like a thread that unifies, that organizes flowers in garland, this absolute reality harmonizes and integrates and unifies everything that you find, that you perceive in this world. So one of the most profound verses in the Rigveda Samhita, Sahasrasesha Purusha Sahasraksha Sahasravad Subhumim Vishuddho Vrutva Atyadishta Dashanguram. One of the most profound and one of the most popular verses in the Rigveda Samhita is called Purusha Suktam. That Suktam means a hymn which depicts the absolute reality as an all-pervading, transcendental, all-encompassing, all-accommodating divine principle. That it is immanent. That means it is existing within and omnipresent. It is all-pervading and transcendental. That Atitya means it is Sahasra Seksha Purusha, the graphic language of the Vedas. Means it has got 1,000 heads. Now, if you describe God or absolute principle with 1,000 heads, it is absolutely ridiculous. But the Vedic sages used a metaphor. Sahasram, if you look at the dictionary, Sahasra means 1,000. But in the Vedic language, Sahasra means infinite. So, The one who has 1000 means infinite hertz, infinite eyes, infinite. Well, it means all-pervading. At the same time, Purusha means the divine reality that is existing within us. Purishete iti Purushaha. Human body, body-mind complex, is compared to a city with 9 doors opening to the outside world, and the 2 eyes, the 2 ears, nostrils, mouth, and of course 2 openings. So total altogether 9. And within this is the divine principle that activates, that energizes, that operates the entire body-mind complex. That's a divine principle. In that sense, it is called Purusha. It is all-pervading, omnipresent, and transcendental. Now, Masthani Sarvabhudani. So, all beings exist in me. All living beings exist in me. But I don't exist in them. So, Sarvabhudani Masthani Aham na teshu avasthitaha. Means, all living beings exist in me, but I don't exist in them. What it means is, I do not dwell exclusively in any of these, not exhausted by them. Suppose you define God as the one who exists in everyone. Then you are actually limiting this, the dimension of God. And once you limit, you are defining. And once you define, it becomes finite. So, though this absolute reality exists in everything and everywhere, still everything and everywhere altogether do not exhaust or do not limit the absolute reality. In other words, what it means is, it is not a numerical totality, it is an essential totality. So 2 types of totality we can say. One is numerical. Or, well, X means so many things together. That is a numerical. But X is the essence of everything. That is another way of defining. So God, or the absolute reality, Atman, is depicted as the inner essence, as the essential reality, as the essential totality of everything in this world. In that sense, you can't say the absolute reality exists in anything, in the sense that altogether everything together exhausts or limits the absolute reality. So this is the important point to remember. So the real, so you have to remember, the absolute reality is clay, and pots and pans are all different utensils. Now, can we say that, let's say 1,000 different clay pots or pans will be equal to clay? No, it cannot be. Because clay is the karana, means the cause. And clay pots together are the effect. The effects can never be equal to the cause. Because the cause has to go through a process, and the result of that processing is called the effect. So like that, why? Because the cause has got many other possibilities of taking any other different shapes. But a clay pot as such cannot become a clay jar. But the clay itself can assume any other forms. It's a technical, of course, unless we are trained in some kind of logic and epistemology, this may not be good, but you are most welcome to ask questions at the end of it. So, in other words, different entities are by themselves limited. At the same time, the absolute reality is infinite, and the infinite can never be exhausted or completed in the finite. That's the idea behind. And the effect is relative, the cause is the absolute. Now, this idea was later explained and described in some other scriptures. Before that, I want to refer to the great writings of Shankaracharya and then Ramanuja. Ramanuja has tried to explain this in the light of one of the most profound statements that appear in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. It is called Antaryami Brahmana, which is very profound. So we'll discuss that later. The Shankaracharya says, Tesham bhudanam akamevatma iti adateshu sthida iti mandabuddhinam avabhasate. What it means is, suppose you say, since I am the self in everything, so people may think, well, the ignorant may think as though I dwell in them. I want to mention one important point. When this is especially true in the Oriental religious traditions. In Oriental religious traditions, of course in Catholic religion as well, you find somebody is venerated as a saint. So in Catholic tradition, you have this practice of canonization. Innumerable saints have appeared who are supposed to have some divine experience. At least, of course, many of them have to wait for post-mortem recognition. They were not recognized when they were living. When they are living in this world, they didn't have a very pleasant time. So that is the unfortunate part of it. But still, we recognize them as divine reality. In some other religious traditions, even some other Abrahamic traditions themselves, they don't accept the idea of respecting an individual or attributing to an individual any divine quality, any godly quality. See, if you go on meditating on God, then your meditation on God should reflect in your action, in your thought, in your behavior. So whatever you meditate upon, that will certainly reflect on your character. Somebody who learns music, you find, who are devoted to music, that person will go on humming some kind of music. Poets will try to go on writing something. Let us say, any kind of even ordinary trade or business or activity that we specialize on, it will influence our mind and thought. Similarly, if you meditate on God, if you read Holy Scriptures, if you recite prayers on every day, then that too prayers to divine reality, the embodiment of compassion, mercy, goodness, divinity, and so on, then those prayers and similar activities should define and influence the way you behave, the way you interact with others. You go on praying as hard as possible, and the more you pray, you become more and more cruel and intolerant, and then there's an insult to God whom you boast you are meditating upon. Better not to meditate on God and become a monster. So when you become a devotee of God, you also will naturally assume some divine godly qualities. That's the logic behind recognizing the great mystics, St. Teresa of Avila, St. John of Arc. There are innumerable Christian saints who spoke to God, lived in close proximity with God, lived in a divine world, and you can find the number goes thousands and thousands in Hindu tradition, and many, many hundreds in Buddhist tradition, of course. So what I mean to say, so now people say that, oh, you are worshipping him because you think he is God. It's not. In him there is the divine spark present, which is unfolding because of that person's prayers, meditation, spiritual practices. The inner divinity that is already within him is slowly begins to manifest, begins to express itself, and when it expresses, you become more compassionate, more generous, more humane, more broad-minded, and more tolerant. more spiritual, as we call it. Now that is the real implication of this idea. That means and the self of all beings, still remember, and you should not think everything in this world is God. No. Therefore, Lord Krishna says, the divine reality, God is present and existing in everyone as the divine spark, divine principle, but you cannot equate, you cannot consider different beings as gods and goddesses. That point is very much clear here. In fact, many people have a wrong, of course, sometimes ridiculous interpretations for Hindu image worship. They should read this actually. Hinduism doesn't believe that a statue is God or an image is God. Not at all. An image or a statue is a symbol for us to remind ourselves of the all-pervading divine principle, and for that we create a symbol on which we can focus on our mind, so that eventually we will be able to connect with our own divine nature within ourselves. For that we need an external focus. We need somebody or something to pray to. In that sense, this should be understood. Of course, again, now after this, there is another verse which is technically a contradiction of what Lord Krishna says in the 4th verse. But before that, I must try to explain to you the interpretations of Ramanuja himself. Ramanuja is well known for having written a very profound interpretation on this 4th verse. So I shall read that, then I shall try to explain this in the light of scriptures. Ramanuja writes, this entire universe is pervaded by me. According to Ramanuja's philosophy, we should know, it is called Advaita, qualified non-dualism, in which the highest idea of God is one divine person with attributes and names and qualities, from whom different living beings emerge, and from whom this empirical world also emerges. This is the philosophy. So we are not going to discuss that specific school of philosophy. If you have got anything to ask, you can ask me during interaction. But Ramanuja writes, in fact, I am reading Ramanuja just to point out that he has made a great commentary on this by referring to one very profound passage. Is a Brahmana, Antaryami Brahmana, Upanishad. Ramanuja writes, Idam Chedana Achedanatmakam Krishnam Jagat Avyaktamurtinam Apragasida Surupena Maya Antaryamina Tatam. Antaryami means the inner reality, the inner divine principle. Antaryamedi, it sits within, it exists in all of us, and it activates, controls and regulates our actions, thoughts and emotions and feelings. It's the divine presence within all of us that actually regulates everything that happens in our life, in our body, in our mind and intellect. Asya jagado dharanartham niyamanartham cha seshitvena vyaptam ityarthakam yatha antaryami brahmane ye prithivyam tishtan yam prithivyam veda, etc. So this, what Ramanuja says is, he is referring to one important portion in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which is called Antaryami Brahmanam, which I would like to read because it is actually one of the most profound passages that you can ever find in any world literature. The verse, it comes in the 3rd chapter of Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, and it is the 7th Brahmana, 4th verse. Now, it runs into several verses. What it actually talks about is something interesting. What it says is, is a description of the world as a spirit, saying that all things are strung like a garland with a thread. Everything in this world is strung together as if in a garland by the thread. The thread, the unifying thread, the integrating principle is Antaryami. Antaryami means the inner, immanent, divine principle. Well, trying to explain this in our ordinary empirical terms, I would say, when we do something wrong, if a normal person I'm talking about, when we do something which may not be very desirable thing, there is a voice within us that tells us, tells in the sense, reminds us that it is not the right thing to do. We may not listen to that voice, many of us, but as we become more and more spiritual, this voice becomes more and more audible, and we become more and more inclined to listen to this voice. And the presence of this divine principle helps us to connect this divine principle with everything and everybody around us. That's why I said earlier, when you meditate upon a God whom you consider to be the creator of the entire humanity, then we will naturally become humane, spiritual, compassionate, generous, and broad-minded. Now, in this particular chapter, Antaryami Brahmana, the Upanishad tells you that earth, water, fire, sky, air, heaven, sun, quarters of space, ether, darkness, light, all beings, breath, speech, space, eye, mind, skin, intellect. All these are taken in a graphic style metaphor and then explained how this divine principle exists as the support of all this, and how it exists in every one of these, but still different from it, but still existing within, and regulates, but still remains unattached. In other words, the highest philosophy of God is one attributeless transcendental reality which exists in us but distinct from us. How can it be if it exists in us and distinct from us? And how can it control our activity still distinct from us? If you say God exists in me in the sense that the whole idea of God exists in me, then it will be equivalent to say, well, I am God, which is absolutely ridiculous from a Vedantic perspective. But if you say there is in me the divine spark, which I can feel when I meditate, I am not able to feel all the time, but when I read a scripture, when I meditate, when I pray, I feel, I am able to connect with that deep inner principle. Not all the time. Those who can do the all the time, we call them saints in all religious traditions. That's why they are canonized. In Christian tradition or in Hindu tradition, they are Brahmavid Brahmaiva Bhavati. Those realized spiritual mystics, they become non-distinct from the absolute reality because they live in them, they become one with them. So of course, so long as a person lives with this physical body, there will be, of course, a separation at the physical level. But when you always think of God, meditate on God, talk about God, think about God, then every word you speak becomes sacred as a divine mantra or psalms, and every thought becomes like a meditation, and every movement, the whole life becomes a pilgrimage. So the verse is very simple. I can read a few of them. There are many verses. Ye prithiviyam tishtan prithivya antaraha yam prithivina veda yasya prithvi shariram ye prithiviyam antaro yamayadi eshataya atma antaryami amrutaka. So prithvi means earth. Next, again, yaha apsu tishtan adbhyo antaraha yam apo na viduhu yasya apa shariram yo apa antaro yamayati eshataya atma antaryami amrutaka. I shall explain this after this. Yaha akno tishtan aknehi antaraha yam aknir naveda yasya akni shariram yaha aknim antaro yamayati eshataya atma antaryami amrutaka. Yaha antarikshe tishtan antariksha antaraha yam antariksham naveda yasya antariksham shariram yaha antariksham antaro yamayati eshataya atma antaryami amrutaka. Now, it goes on like that. What it means? This is an instruction coming from Yajnavalkya. Yajnavalkya is instructing. Yajnavalkya says, he is a great teacher in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. He who dwells in this earth, yet is within the earth. Suppose you say the divine principle dwells in this earth. You may think that trees and mountains and valleys all. So in order to avoid that possible misunderstanding, that is Shankaracharya's interpretation, the Upanishad tells you it is within the earth. It is in the earth, but within the earth. If you say it is within the earth, then the iron ore, coal, all these can be. But Shankaracharya says no. So the earth doesn't know it. And then the earth is only its body. But it is distinct from earth, but it exists in earth. And it controls the earth within. He is your own inner self, the inner controller, the Atma. Now, this Antaryami Brahmanam is considered to be one of the most profound. Of course, it goes on, it's a very big chapter, a very profound chapter. In fact, this metaphor continues like that, he who dwells in water is within the water, whom the water doesn't know, whose body the water is, who controls the water within. He is yourself, the inner controller, the immortal. He who dwells in the fire, yes, within the fire doesn't know it, but fire is only its body. It controls the fire within, is your Atma, inner self. In other words, what it means is, this Atman, as the divine principle, it exists in us, but it doesn't mean that our head, our hands, or everything is Atman. No. It exists within us. It is distinct from the body-mind complex, but though it is distinct from the body-mind complex, it regulates the body-mind complex, and it is all-pervading. So in order to show that it is all-pervading or omnipresent, the Upanishad uses a technique. It goes on giving a list of different entities, and a beautiful poetry is the result of this sublime discussion of higher philosophy. So that is the real implication of the fourth verse. And those who have got in doubt, you can ask during interaction. The next verse should be understood carefully. Nachamasthani bhudani paschime yogameshwaram bhudabhut nacha bhudasthu mamatma bhudabhavanaka. Now, this mantra, this sloka tells, these things do not exist in me. So the previous verse said, Masthani sarva bhudani. This verse tells you, Bhudani namasthani. Mastani means things do not exist in me. Means in reality. Because if you define God as the place where all the living beings exist, just like you define a jar. Suppose you have a jar full of water in front of you. If you want to understand the jar, you say, jar is the utensil in which the water is kept. So you are defining the jar. And you can define it. So the absolute reality cannot be defined or described. It is indescribable and it is non-definable. Anyone who wants to get an idea of what this Upanishad, this mantra tells, you can read Rudolf Otto's interpretation of Meister Eckhart. He is the great theologian, the 13th century German theologian, whose writings almost resemble as if they were translations from Shankaracharya's commentary. Shankaracharya lived almost 450 years before, maybe 500 years before Meister Eckhart. 8th century, Eckhart, 13th century. But it's surprising how great minds converts without being known to each other. It's a grand example of, in fact, it's a proof that the higher transcendental reality, the highest idea of the absolute reality is attainable by those who turn the search inward instead of turning the search outward. So here, nachamasthani bhudani pasyame yogameshwaram. In reality, these things do not exist in me. In the sense, I am not the same as the external things. As I mentioned, you cannot define God. What is God? God is the one who is present in everyone. So you have defined it. So in order to avoid this terrible misunderstanding that absolute reality can be limited by a definition or description, this verse tells you these things do not exist in reality. And then he says, Bhudabhrut nacha bhudastho mamatma bhuda bhavanaka. All these things bring forth from me, and I am supporting all these beings. But the real Atman doesn't dwell in them. In the sense, I am not exhausted, I am not limited by all these things, though as a divine spark exists in everyone. So this is the important verse from a philosophical point of view. In order to explain this further, I shall say a few things about the epistemological foundation of this view. Epistemology, for your information, theory of knowledge. In Aristotelian epistemology, in Greek epistemology, we have direct perception, inference. Verbal testimony is not often accepted except by those who believe in Christian theology, revealed scriptures. But in Hindu tradition, there are 10 tools in epistemology. The crudest kind of materialism that the world has ever seen existed in India long ago, around, they say, according to about 5000 BC, they were called Charvaka. They believed only in direct perception. They did not even accept inference. They were crude materialists. Whatever you see with your eyes, that is there for that time, for that time frame. When you hear, it is there. When it's gone, it is gone. So I am not referring to them. Some of the Buddhist philosophers, they believed they believed in direct perception and also in inference. And of course, some of them believed also in comparison. It's called analogy. Of course, Pratyaksha, Anumana, Upamana. Upamana means analogy. Anumana means inference. Pratyaksha means direct perception. verbal testimony, Shabda Pramana. And then there are those who believe in direct perception, in inference, in analogy, and also in verbal testimony. Vedas were considered to be the source of knowledge. As in Catholic Christian tradition, more specifically, they believe the revealed scriptures as a source of knowledge. So, like that, in the tradition also, the Vedas were considered to be the source of knowledge. And of course, then there were, presumption, arthavati, anupalabdhi, and also negation, the absence of it. These are 6 pramanas. Pramanas means the tools of knowledge, different elements of epistemology. And then, after going beyond all that, some of the little known philosophical groups, they were called, the Pauranikas, those who believe in mythological books, those who believed in other fringe groups who believed in other secondary scriptures. They believed Pramana is a real incident that they have witnessed. So actually it is included in direct perception, but they would make it an independent Pramana. Pramana is a tool of knowledge. And then Aitihya, hearsay, cheshta, external gesture, and deduction in Parisesha. So total 10. Now, among them, there were 2 fundamental schools who believed in 2 different views with regard to the relationship between the cause and effect. One school believed that the effect pre-exists in cause. They are called Satkaryavadins. The effect pre-exists in cause. The effect is somehow inseparably linked to the cause. They are called Satkaryavadins. In fact, Advaita follows one school of Satkaryavada. It's called Vivarta. The effect pre-exists in cause, but the cause actually doesn't undergo a transformation when it becomes the effect. This is called Vivarta. When the cause really undergoes a transformation, it is called Parinama. Like oil, seeds become oil, real transformation, Parinama. Or like threads become cloth. It is only Vivarta, because even when there is a cloth in front of you, it is nothing but thread. You take away all the thread and there is no cloth. You take away all the gold from a golden bracelet, there is no bracelet. Like that. The opposite school was followed by Naiyayikas and Vaisheshikas, called Arambhavada. They believe, they have a very peculiar, almost ridiculous way of looking at this cause-effect link. They believe that every effect, every product is every effect is a new product. They won't admit that the pot has any relationship with the clay from which it is made. They won't admit that the cloth that you're wearing has any relation with the threads from which this cloth is made. That is something very ridiculous. So they believed Arambhavada means everything is a new beginning. Of this, Vedantins admit Vivartavada. In other words, the infinite actually appears to have become the finite. Brahman has not really become the world. When you look at Brahman in association with name and form, it appears to have become this world. That's why in Hindu tradition there were many mystics. They called Avadhutas, Advaitins. When they reached that level of spiritual experience, they saw the whole creation, everything, as non-distinct and non-different from Brahman. Before you reach that experience, you may say Brahman is only reality and everything else is only relative. When you reach that experience, then even the so-called world that you dismiss as relative is non-distinct from Brahman. So anyway, so those of you who have got doubt, I shall continue this discussion in the next class. Because I said only a warning earlier, 9th chapter is an absolutely wonderful, is a marvelous piece of philosophical literature. We'll continue discussion in the next class. Now most welcome to questions. Thank you.
Swamiji, when you were explaining the 5th verse, you used the analogy of water in a jar. Could you just explain that again? I did not fully understand.
Oh, yeah. You know, Nacha masthani bhudani paschime yogameshwaram bhudabhud nacha bhudastu mamatma bhuda bhavanaka. You see, the point is, you say there is, in this last verse, there is one, bhuda bhrut, bhudastu. Mamatma Bhuda Bhavanaka means I am the one who supports. I am the supporter of everything. Everything comes from me, Bhuda Brut, Bhudastha. Everything exists in me, I am the supporter. And then the question may arise in the commentaries, different commentaries they say, is it like, suppose you define God as the one who supports the whole world. Is it something like a vessel in which you hold water? The vessel supports the water. Is it like that? So, Shankaracharya and other commentators, remember, this is the golden era of world philosophical. They went on going, analyzing this. No, it cannot be like that. Because if you describe God as the one, God equals the one who supports everything, then you are limiting. Any attempt to describe or define is bringing the infinite to the finite level. Any attempt to define, you can go on writing thousands of books describing God, but you should never say that you are finished. Oh, I have written. If you say this book contains the whole wisdom of God, then actually even you will consider it as an insult if I tell you, or you don't know anything other than what this tiny book contains. You see, God's wisdom is infinite, we say, be inconceivably great, unthinkably great. And then you say, everything is in this small book. How can we say that? So, can you define God as the one who is the supporting principle of everything? That is one of the ways of explaining, but that explanation is not exhaustive. That's the idea behind. So, yeah. Even the mantra that I quoted, Antaryami Brahmana, when you read Upanishad mantras, you will never understand the implication. So Shankaracharya writes, why Prithiviyam Dishtan, Prithiviyam Antaraha? It is enough the Upanishad say Prithiviyam Dishtan. Everything that exists on Prithivi, on earth. Then he says Prithiviyam Antaraha. Then within the earth. And Prithvi doesn't understand. Naveda. Prithvi doesn't understand it. Yet within Prithvi, it remains within the earth and regulates everything. Still distinct from it. Like that, the absolute reality is linked to us. But this body-mind complex is not the absolute reality. How to make this? If you make a statement like that, it is not easy to understand. So the Vedas go on explaining these grand metaphors. So you should not ever assume, why can't the scriptures be more direct? Remember, there are many scriptures which are very direct. Sri Ramakrishna says, God is the only reality. Is that enough for humanity to really believe God is only reality? For a Sri Ramakrishna it is enough. But most people need a lot of masala, a lot of different items for lunch. So they need epistemology, they need a lot of thinking process, they need a kind of analysis, because that will help us to keep our mind and intellect engaged in some higher activity, so that the mind and intellect will not go after undesirable things. That is one advantage of philosophy. I often give this idea in my Sunday lectures. I do it many times, hundreds of lectures I've given after coming here. See, I don't say that philosophy takes you to God, but philosophy takes you away from many things which will take you in the opposite direction. That's the idea behind philosophy or music, higher music I'm talking about, spiritually, music. All these great things will not directly take you to God, of course, but these things will certainly keep you engaged, so that for that moment your mind will not go after the undesirable things. That is the advantage of philosophy. So if you read this Bhagavad Upanishad, of course, Shankaracharya's commentaries, Sanskrit language, of course, is a barrier to those who don't know, but it is a marvelous piece of literature. Yeah. And he goes on, different earth, sky, fire, water principle, mind, intellect, thought process, words, speech, everything, one after another. He says, this divine reality is present in it, but within it, but it doesn't know it, and still beyond, distinct from it, regulates from within. It goes on like that. Anyway, that's another word we'll discuss later. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Swamiji. Yeah, even though we don't know the verses, when you explained it, the Upanishad verses, they were very beautiful.
Yeah.
And at the end of each verse, he also connects the same reality to our own inner self, which is immortal as well. So it's the same principle in both places.
So it takes you from the grossest things that you pursue, that you see around you, to the highest, subtlest idea. That's the idea.
Swamiji, the phrase avyakta murtina in verse 4.
Yeah.
It seems so direct, and yet so rich. The idea that the unmanifested presence is not something that we would recognize as manifest, and yet it's there in an unmanifested form. Seems very direct and very reasonable.
Very.
But there are endless commentaries on it. And I guess it's just such a rich concept that it stirs the imagination.
Yeah. Do you want to listen to the commentary?
Yes, please.
Okay, of course, certainly. Most welcome. That is I think it's the fourth verse. Okay, most welcome. So, Maya tadamidam sarvam jagad avyakta murtina marsthani sarvabhudani nacha akam teshu avasthitaka. The entire world is pervaded by me, the Atman, the unmanifest. All beings abide in me, but I do not abide in them. That's a difficult thing to understand. In fact, that is put in a different way in the coming verse. Maya mama yaha paro bhava tena tatam vyaptam sarvam idam jagat avyakta murtina na vyakta murti surupam yasya mamasa aham avyakta murti tena maya avyakta murtina karana gojar suruvena ityarthakam. This entire earth is pervaded by the supreme nature of mind, the supreme nature. So the avyakta murti means that unmanifest. The unmanifest is always subtler than the manifest. The manifest is gross, and the unmanifest is actually, let's say the unmanifest is like the clay, and the manifest may be any number of, maybe tens of thousands of different utensils made from clay. The unmanifest is pure raw gold, and the manifest are different ornaments made of gold. The unmanifest is certainly infinite, because without it, the manifest cannot exist. But without manifest, the unmanifest can exist. Without the effect, the cause can exist. But without the cause, the effect cannot exist. You take away all the gold from the golden ornament, there will be no ornament. But you can take the name and form, the effect from gold is still gold only. So that's why the unmanifest. So that's the meaning. I mean, I am the unmanifest since my form is not vyakta, it's not manifest. Then the means, in my unmanifest dimension, I am not perceivable, not perceptible to the senses. Karana agojara swarupena means I cannot be perceived. Mind, intellect, the senses of perception like eyes, ears, sense of smell, sense of touch, sense of taste, all these cannot perceive, comprehend the unmanifest. The senses can only connect with what is manifest. Tasmin mai avyaktamurto sthidani matsthani sarvabhudani brahmadini stambhaparyantani. So, from Brahma, Brahma is the hypothetical highest principle that we can conceive of. More like, I think it could be equated more the creatorship aspect of the anthropomorphic God idea, only for Hinduism or monotheistic religions. So, these from the highest Hiranyagarbha to the most ordinary, insignificant thing like a clump of grass, all exist in me, the unmanifest. Nahi niratmagam kinjit bhudam vyavaharaya avakalpadi ataha masthani maya atmana atmavatvena sthidani ato mayi sthidani iti uchyade. So anything, anyone or anything devoid of Atman cannot be conceived. It's mentioned, you cannot conceive of a golden ornament without gold. You cannot conceive of a clay pot without clay. Like that, nahi niratmagam kinjit bhudam vyavaharaya avakalpati. I may use this cup for drinking water, and the cup is made of clay. But without the clay, one cannot really conceive of this cup. Like that, without the all-pervading, infinite, avyakta, unmanifest reality, we cannot think of anything that is manifest. Manifest means name and form. That should be understood. Manifestation means name and form. That's all. See, the clay pot has this form. Why do we call this cup? Because this form has to be distinguished from other objects made from the same material. We need different names because there are so many people in the world. Suppose you are only one person in the world, you don't need a name. So names become necessary because of multiplicity. And so, name and form, because different forms means different names. That's why the manifest means name and form, nama rupa atmaka. The unmanifest means the dimension before the manifestation, before names and forms emerged. So, these objects, these different entities in names and forms exist in the nameless, formless, unmanifest reality. Tesham bhudanam ahameva atma iti ataha teshu sthita iti mandabuddhinam mudabuddhinam avbhasane. Now what happens is, sometimes some people who don't go deep into philosophy, they may think, well, as if I exist in them. The idea is, I exist in the sense where I am God. If somebody says, that is the most stupid statement you can ever make. If you identify yourself as I, as the divine principle within you, then you're absolutely right from an Advaitic sense. Because in all of us, that divine reality is there. Like a cup tells me, I am clay, the cup is fully justified. because there is clay in this cup. But suppose the cup tells you, I exhaust the entire principle of clay, then the clay is forgetting the fact there are many other utensils made from the same clay. So that is the means, when you limit, you're exhausting everything, and that is a limitation. You're finitizing the infinite. That's the idea. Okay? Thank you. So we will have class next week. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.
Thank you very much, Swami.
Thank you.